My horizon widened as I grew older. Mine was the intoxication of the erstwhile chrysalis finding herself a free, bewinged, fearlessly roaming creature of flight, darting here, there, everywhere, no longer immobilized by her very physique. Oh, blessed joy. I went alone to the location shop. I was sent to the neighbors in the evening alone. I was left alone minding the pot, cooking on the primer stove. Later, but soon enough, came school with its rituals, regulated playtime, and the use of the other name given at baptism, the school name or Christian name. For the first time in my short life, I answered to the name Cynthia. And later still, I was trusted with the adult task of going by train by myself to Wynberg. Wynberg is a white suburb with reasonable shopping and cannot be more than 8 or so kilometers from Retreat, where I caught the train. I was in real danger of bursting apart with pride and feelings of importance the first time mother sent me there. The fact that I had been sent to buy such lowly articles as buttons, elastic, and a baby bottle in no way detracted from the impressiveness of the feat I had been called upon to perform and to which I felt more than equal. With privilege comes responsibility, I was soon to learn, and mishaps are the shadow of every good fortune. Living as we did in cardboard, wood, and zinc shacks, fire was a constant specter in our lives. Although my own family has lived in 4 shacks, we have experienced fire only once. That was one of the luckiest days of my life. Or so it seems to me that fateful evening. As well, it should have looked as though God himself had decided to intervene personally in my affairs, for I was absolutely convinced my mother would fulfill a promise of long standing and skin me alive, or worse. We must have been going through a more than usual stint of austerity. It was during the only period I recall of father being out of a job. One evening, he had walked in from work, and instead of the usual greeting said, "Ndibuya now," referring to whatever of the odd assortment of jobs he had done, jobs whose qualification was humility that bordered on self-effacement, zero expectations, and brute-like brawn. His feet would not carry him to that job again. He had brought it back. That was a less brutal way of saying he had been fired. My parents did not discuss this development with us children. They never saddled us with whatever pain they were undergoing. Somehow, though, their anxiety seeped through their pores and covered us like the scab of a wound, ugly, hiding raw hurt. Mother took to putting money in handkerchiefs or rags when sending us to the shops. She would put the money in one corner of the handkerchief, make a fold, a knot, and the money was thus secured. For some reason, we found this practice particularly demeaning. We took it as a personal insult. We felt our dignity was at stake, our intelligence in question, our very sense of worth assaulted. I would rather have died than be caught out in this childish practice by a friend. And at that time, everyone I knew was a friend, and the opinion they held of me mattered terribly. Needless to say, as soon as I was out of mother's sight, I undid the offending knot and carried the money in my very competent hand as any self-respecting, sane person would. On the day in question, a Friday, I recall vividly, I was sent to get paraffin, which was to be used to cook the evening meal. It was late afternoon. Mother gave me a half-crown and an empty gallon tin. The shop was about 1 kilometer away. However, not the physical distance, but the friends I met on the way to the shop were my undoing that day. What with talking, a little harmless playing, running and laughing, although I swear all the time my left hand was a tight fist guarding the money. I don't know whatever made me want to verify the presence of the half-crown. I stared at my hand, and what I did not see there, the tightly held half-crown, made my mouth dry. The hangman's noose would have been a welcome salvation. I kept staring at my hand as if by doing so I could, by some miracle, wheel the coin back into it. All the steps I had taken, where could I have lost the money? At one point, did it slip out of my hand? These questions raced through my screaming mind as I and a couple of friends retraced my steps, searching for the coin, a hopeless task in view of the fact that we had no roads and the trails we followed day in, day out were made by the sheer weight of hundreds and hundreds of feet pounding on the sand until footpaths were etched among the sand dunes. What chance of recovering a coin among those trillions of minuscule sand particles whose very texture and behavior combine to defy and undermine one's efforts as well as underscore the futility of those same efforts? Even the saliva test failed. We children believe that dropping saliva on the palm of one hand, hitting it with the 2 fingers of the other hand, thus making it fly onto the ground, would pinpoint the direction in which the lost object might be found. An hour or so, which probably was far less in reality, but such was my apprehension that it seemed a very long time, had passed between the departure of the little innocent and loved girl from her house and the emergence of the new me, who was making, even at that moment, a drastic decision. I concluded I was leaving home. This seemed the wisest choice in view of the certainty I had of being killed that day by my mother for my deed. How would I explain the disappearance of her money from her well and truly fastened knot? Oh, how clearly then I saw the wisdom of her ways. It grew darker, and as the only decision I had made was that of leaving home, I was somewhat at a loose end. I had no idea where I would go. I knew no one would welcome me to their home without question, without notifying my parents or dragging me back home. In fact, I was pretty certain to be hauled home by any adult who saw me abroad at this late hour. Such were the disadvantages of living in a small community. Not only does everybody know everyone else, they also know everybody else's children and can never keep their noses out of everybody's business, especially when that business is a child. I felt the limitations imposed by my environment with all my heart. By this time, my friends had long left me to my devices, mindful of their own precarious positions with their families, and had gone about their legitimate business. So, hiding from people, I inched my way in the general direction of home. I realized there was a vast difference between the darkness anywhere else and the darkness in the vicinity of my home. The latter was safer, or so it seemed to me. And leaving home did not mean I had to be scared out of my mind all night through. I was leaving home. I would, but be within my family's earshot in case I were in danger. That's how I reasoned. It was quite dark by the time I rounded the hill and came within sight of what should have been the darker shapes surrounded by the general darkness of a lightless night. The buildings in one of which, in a two-room unit, my family now lived. However, I was met with the sight of angry, dark, billowing smoke and fiery flames that leapt to the inky sky. The crackling of burning wood was accompanied by shapes of bodies scurrying here, there, and everywhere as people attempted to salvage whatever of their possessions they could lay their hands on, a task made doubly difficult by the presence of scavengers, looters who stood by waiting to steal from the piles rising next to the burning building. Weak with weariness, I ran forward, yelling, announcing my presence and safety to my family. Reunion was sweet indeed. My mother had not been able to assure father or herself that I had not been sleeping when the fire broke out. To this day, none in my family knows that the copious tears I shed that night had nothing to do with the fact that, except for what I had on, I had no clothes and we had nowhere to call home. Our situation improved somewhat following the fire, in which fortunately no lives were lost. We left Bloflame and went to live in a brand new location, Zwelicha, new site. Zwelicha had been a forest and was cleared specifically for the victims of the fire that had destroyed our home and rendered nearly 100 persons homeless. We were given sites on which to build, and father put up a 2-bedroom house with kitchen and a dining room. Jongi and I shared the children's bedroom, whilst Tata, Mama, and the younger children, a toddler and a baby, shared the other one. Of course, the houses were still shacks, but instead of the customary building where as many as 12 families lived in one big tin shack that had been subdivided into smaller units, Zwelicha was unashamedly pretentious. Each house stood on its very own little plot. The houses stood in rows of 5s. The fifth, much smaller, stood at a respectfully bigger distance away from the other 4 to its front. It was the toilet, as any who cared to look at its back could easily ascertain from the bucket clearly visible from the hatch. 4 families, 1 toilet, quite an improvement from digging holes in the sand.